We continue our series looking at the Atlantic Division versus the Montreal Canadiens with the Sunbelt, the Florida Panthers, and the Tampa Bay Lightning. Let me tell you guys something. Normally when the Canadiens go down for those holiday trips and they end up going through Florida, we all worry about them getting burnt. Well, guess what? It's all tanned and toasty for Montreal, and I think it's going to be that way this season as well. Hey gang, Coach here from Puck Talk Montreal, and today we look at maybe not the toughest part of the division, but the one that historically has given us the most issues, and that is the Sunbelt. Florida Panthers and Tampa Bay Lightning. Now, of course, the Panthers, two-time Stanley Cup champions, they've got to 3 straight Stanley Cup finals. They're always going to be a tough out for the Montreal Canadiens. Tampa Bay, I think Tampa Bay's time has come. They've been a perennial powerhouse for at least a decade, and I think now they're going to start dwindling as far as their output is concerned. If we take a look at the standings as an example in the division, of course, the Leafs were number 1, but below them, Tampa and Florida. Montreal 7 points back of the Florida Panthers and a full 11 points back of the Tampa Bay Lightning. Now, of course, we did talk about the Ottawa Senators and Detroit Red Wings last time. They're going to be itching to get into a playoff spot, but Montreal is looking to move ahead. And as we talk about moving ahead, you've got to look at those two teams in Florida and say to yourself, what can Montreal do differently? There's not much. Yes, Montreal's gone out and gotten better players. Yes, Montreal has Ivan Demidov come into the lineup. But overall, when you look at the numbers as far as these two teams are concerned, there's not much that the Montreal Canadiens could have done any better to have a better result. Sure, they could have swept both, but the results last year were nothing short of spectacular for the Canadiens. So let's take a look at the signings, for the Tampa Bay Lightning this offseason. Jake Pelche getting signed, Pontus Heimberg, Gage Goncalves, Jack Finley, Maxwell Crozier, and Yanni Gourde. The biggest name we know there is Yanni Gourde. 6 years, $2.33 million per year for $14 million during that contract. It's a nice contract for Yanni Gourde, who's back with the Tampa Bay Lightning, and honestly, he's earned it. Gourde is a very serviceable player, and he played very well for the Tampa Bay Lightning. The only reason he left was because they left him eligible for the expansion draft, and that's why the Kraken picked him up. It is what it is, right? But getting Gourde back is a huge step for the Tampa Bay Lightning as far as trying to be a little bit tighter defensively, because he was a very good defensive forward, produced offensively when called upon sometimes. And the most important thing, he's a thorn in the Canadiens' ass. And I expect him to be just that when he comes back to Tampa this season. As we move forward and we take a look at the trades, the only trade that Tampa made in the offseason was to acquire Sam O'Reilly from the Edmonton Oilers in exchange for Isaac Howard. Looks to me like a minor league deal. So overall, the Tampa Bay Lightning haven't really changed anything with the exception of the addition of Gourde. You take a look at how the season series went last season, and the Canadiens, for the most part, goaltending-wise, the Habs were at .885 in the save percentage, and for Tampa Bay Lightning, .888. 0.003 difference between the two teams. So there's not much to look at there other than the fact that Andrei Vasilevskiy did not have a very good year in goal for the Tampa Bay Lightning. It's kind of one of the reasons why they weren't as high in the standings as they normally were year after year. Yes, they were second in the division, but they were nowhere near the Leafs. So you say to yourself, is Vasilevskiy on the upswing or the downswing? I would say he's a little bit on the downswing. Will he have as bad a season this year? That remains to be seen. They have not made any changes on defense. So really, what's it going to look like? As we look at Tampa's lineup, up front, they've got firepower. They've got Gensel, Point, and Kucherov on the first line. Kucherov, still the best forward in the National Hockey League, in my opinion. Hagel, Sorelli, and Bjorkstrand on the second line. Gourde is going to line up on the third line with Paul and Gonsalves, and Holmberg with Girgensons and Geeky will be the fourth line. Defensively, Hedman, McDonough, Lilleberg on the left, Moser, Cernak, and Radish on the right. Vasilevskiy and Johansson, of course, between the pipes. So defensively, I mean, we can all admit that Victor Hedman, while still a good, solid defenseman, is not nearly as mobile as he used to be. Same goes for Ryan McDonagh. In fact, there was a lot of talk during the offseason that the Tampa Bay Lightning would look to move McDonagh. That didn't happen. McDonagh is where he is. So, what are we doing here? Tampa Bay needs to be better defensively if they're going to have any luck against the Montreal Canadiens. The Canadiens last year were 2-1 against the Tampa Bay Lightning, and they outscored them. Where is it here? 11-9 in the season series. So low-scoring games, other than the first game that they played in December. The Canadiens won that one 5-2, but then in January they beat Tampa by a score of 3-2, and then Tampa in February beat the Canadiens 5-3. So, pretty evenly matched. And when you look at specialty teams, the Canadiens with a huge advantage there. And that's another thing that Tampa was normally good at, but no longer is. Canadiens, 2 for 6 on the power play, 33.3%, while Tampa was only 1 for 8. So again, Montreal getting the short end of the stick as far as penalty calls is concerned. But at the end of the day, they managed to get more power play goals than the Tampa Bay Lightning and had a little bit more success. So that's good as far as the Canadiens are concerned. Shots-wise, the shots are relatively even. The goal differential in favor of the Canadiens by 15 shots in the 3 games. So they're producing more offense against the, I would say, long in the tooth defense of the Tampa Bay Lightning. The Canadian speed going a huge way to doing that. The increased speed of having Ivan Demidov out there, a healthy Patrick Laine, Zach Balduke, and the others will just be a bigger thorn in Tampa's side. So I don't foresee Tampa staying in that 3-hole, or the 2-hole, I should say. Tampa finished second in the division. They're not going to be there next year. For as much as people think they are, there are other teams in the division that have gotten better, right? Of course, the Leafs, they're still going to be at the top of the division, I think. But we'll talk about that tomorrow. But when it comes to Florida and Tampa, one thing about Tampa for sure is they really haven't gone out of their way to be better. So John Cooper and Julien Brisebois have put a lot of thought into their team as it is right now. They trust it, but it's nowhere near as good as it used to be. Back in the day, you had Steven Stamkos on the power play. You had Alex Killorn. They were much more dangerous, and they used to produce more on the power play. Now that power play is nowhere near as dangerous. Once you get past that first wave, you should be in the clear. The proof was last year, 1 for 8. That trend will continue because they haven't done anything to augment that power play unit. So we'll see what happens. But as I said, Tampa will not be in the 2-hole next year in the division. If anything, they're going to drop, and either Montreal or the Senators are going to take that 2 spot. That's where I think it's going to be. Unless, of course, the next team that I'm going to talk about, that being the Florida Panthers, can continue to play the same brand of hockey that they played throughout last season. Now, granted, the Canadiens swept a series against the Florida Panthers last year. Why? Well, you could say one thing: goaltending. The Panthers' goaltending against the Montreal Canadiens was absolutely putrid, .840 save percentage. Whereas Montreal, their goaltending was near perfect, .950. A lot of that has to do, of course, with Sam Montembeault playing well against his former team. And you know how it is, right? You play against your former team, you want to bring your best game, and Montembeault certainly did that in the 4 games against the Florida Panthers. I think actually one of those was a Jakub Dobeš start, but I digress. I didn't go that far into really breaking down what it was that led us to beating Florida. But one way or the other was the goaltending. There was one shutout, 4-0 at home. That was on December, just before New Year's, actually. Then I believe that was the Dobeš start, actually, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong. I'm sorry, that was in Florida. Man, oh man, I can't read my own handwriting. Then you had a win in Montreal in March on the 15th. Another win in Florida, 4-2. That was on the 30th of March. And then a day later, they played back-to-backs. The Canadiens got an OT win 3-2 to finish off the series. So the Canadiens, of course, scoring more goals than the Tampa Bay Lightning in those 4 wins. The goal differential was, 9 goals better for the Montreal Canadiens. And like I said, the goaltending was not great for the Panthers. And then if you look at the power play, where am I here? The Panthers were 1 for 8 against the Canadiens, while the Canadiens were 3 for 10. So, the Canadiens running at 30% on the power play, that's great against the Panthers. The Panthers 1 for 8 on the power play, that's not great. We know that can be better. If we look at the Panthers as far as their lineups are concerned in the signings, right? They signed like Luke Kunin, Maki Samochevich, sorry if I butchered that name, Jeff Petrie at $775, where that career has gone in a hurry. Daniil Tarasov, Thomas Nosek, Brad Marchand, huge signing. We'll talk about that in a second. Aaron Ekblad getting re-signed for 8 years, and Sam Bennett. So you could see right there in those last 3 signings, Marchand, Ekblad, and Bennett, the Florida Panthers put a lot of value in their core. Now, Brad Marchand, of course, a trade deadline deal to get him from the Boston Bruins. Marchand, a big part of the Stanley Cup win for the Florida Panthers. They want to see whether or not they can keep that magic going with another trip to the Stanley Cup final. And they think Marchand is a big part of that actually happening. Of course, Aaron Ekblad, their captain on defense, no question that Ekblad needed to be re-signed, and he was. And then, of course, there's Sam Bennett, who was absolutely fantastic in the Stanley Cup playoffs for the Panthers. They couldn't let him go to free agency. They re-signed him long-term. So those moves in and of themselves, the Panthers didn't make any trades. So those moves in and of are good enough to be trades. When you talk about Brad Marchand re-signing Ekblad, and re-signing Sam Bennett, then, of course, you add the likes of Luke Kunin to your system. Kunin, of course, not really panning out the way people expected, but still got a lot of potential. And then there's the addition of Jeff Petrie on defense. Now, Petrie, of course, did not have a good year last year, which is why he's with the Florida Panthers this season. But let's take a look at their roster. Up front, you've got Verhaeghe, Barkov, and Reinhart. Then Boqvist, Bennett, Rodriguez. Lundell in the middle of the third line with Luostarinen and Brad Marchand, and Greer, Nosek, and Kunin. And then on defense, you got Forsling, Mikkola, and Kulikov, Ekblad, Jones, and Petrie. And then, of course, in goal, you've got Sergei Bobrovsky and Tarasov. Take a look at this roster up and down. You look at their defense. Those 6, depending on how Petrie plays, but even he can play very good hockey. Those 6 are probably the most solid 6 defensemen in the National Hockey League. Add Sergei Bobrovsky to that mix. And if Bob the goalie can be better than he was in the regular season last year, the Canadiens are going to have trouble with the Panthers. So it remains to be seen whether or not they can actually get by the Panthers. But, the defense is what it is. Ekblad needs to remain healthy. Jeff Petrie needs to be the Petrie we saw with the Montreal Canadiens and not the player with the Red Wings or the Penguins. The list just goes on and on when it comes to that. Kulikov is Kulikov. He's good on defense. And again, going back to the list of forwards, I mean, Carter Verhaeghe, Sasha Barkov, and Sam Reinhart, that's a quality first line. Bennett, Rodriguez, Boqvist, quality second line. So there's a lot of talent there. I think the biggest question when it comes to the Florida Panthers is whether or not they have the energy to go for a third year in a row. Here's the thing. When you take a look back to the last teams that won more than 2 Stanley Cups in a row, you're talking about the New York Islanders. You're talking about the Montreal Canadiens in the 70s. Seasons were shorter, playoffs were shorter, and the season ended a lot earlier. So they had more time to convalesce in the offseason, to get back into shape for the regular season, and so on and so forth. Nowadays, hockey is a year-round sport. You take a look at players, right? For the most part, most teams that don't make the playoffs, yes, they end up finishing the season in April. But most other teams, they go through the grind, the back-to-backs and everything else, and then they go into the playoffs, and they try to stay there as long as possible. The Stanley Cup champion stays there until June. So you've got July and August to really get a break, which you don't normally do because You take a couple of weeks off and you're right back in the gym again, trying to stay in shape for the next season, especially if you're one of the older players of the league and can't afford to really lose any of the muscle that you've got in your body and your ability to move and stretch. So you tend to be on the ice more, you tend to be in the gym more, and you take maybe a couple weeks off with family just to be able to spend some time with your kids, and you're back at it. So can the Florida Panthers three-peat as Stanley Cup champions? They've already three-peated as far as the appearance in the Stanley Cup final is concerned. Whether or not they could three-peat as Stanley Cup champions, that's going to be all contingent on two things. One, as I mentioned, Sergei Bobrovsky has to be a hell of a lot better during the regular season. He was good in the playoffs, but his regular season left a lot to be desired. The defense, on paper, has to be just as good on the ice. It can't be one of these defenses where you've got a couple of guys like Ekblad and Kulikov playing well, and then the rest of the squad just, withers away. It's going to be a full six-guy effort. So, Seth Jones is probably going to be just as good as he was last year, but Seth Jones, Ekblad, they're going to be solid. Kulikov's going to be solid. It's up to the other three, starting with Jeff Petrie. Petrie's got to get his game back. He's capable of playing good hockey. Now, with a good partner, his game could possibly come back, but it remains to be seen. And at forward, when you're good up the middle, you tend to be good on the wing. The first line, can't say anything about it with Verhaeghe, Reinhart, and Barkov. But the second line, led by Sam Bennett, because Bennett's such a good centerman, that second line is going to flourish. Doesn't matter who's on the wing. And so, can Florida finish in the 3 spot? Yes. Can they finish in the 2? Again, depends on their goaltending, depends on their defense. If that stays as solid as it is on paper, they're going to give the Montreal Canadiens fits. But, as I mentioned, given the additions to the Montreal Canadiens and how much better they've become on paper as well, this should be a very good matchup. In fact, I think these two teams will battle for the division. I don't think the Leafs will be at the top. So I think the division, 3 teams actually, Ottawa, Montreal, and Florida will battle for the division. And so it's going to be interesting to see. That's just my opinion. And you can disagree with me all you want. So that's it for the Sunbelt. How do you foresee the Sunbelt being? Do you think Tampa's going to stay a perennial powerhouse in the division? Or do you see them dropping, given the lack of movement? You think Florida's going to be a little long in the tooth and tire out? Or will they continue to dominate in the playoffs? Make sure you give this video a thumbs up. And be sure to give the channel a thumbs up. Subscribe. And, of course, get that notification. And one last thing. The next episode is going to be about our beloved Toronto Maple Leafs. And I'm going to be hard on those Leafs because I always am. There's good and bad, more bad than good, and it's going to be a fun episode. See you on Friday.